Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the FX Panthera, and in this one we're going to be taking a close look at the magazines and seeing if we can make some small improvements to them. Now we'll say the Panthera fitted with our HFT 500 barrel, this one here, is shooting absolutely phenomenally when single shot loading. When using the magazine the groups do open up very slightly and we are getting one or two flyers. Now if I'm honest, that's not uncommon when using a magazine, as you are introducing another point of error into the actual mechanics of the rifle, but we are going to do one or two things to try and improve it a little so that we can use the magazine comfortably at 50 yards. Right then, so I've brought you in nice and close, and the first thing we'll be doing is sharing some initial observations from the mag itself. Now to begin with, if we check the spring tension on the rotor, that to me feels too strong. As you can see, it's fairly snappy, and even right at the top here, the spring tension is fairly tight. Now what this may be doing is damaging a pellet, as the pellet will be wedged between the rotor and the actual mag housing. We can test this theory by just taking a few pellets, so checking the skirts first, just make sure that there's no damage on them. We'll only do a couple. And then if we use a drill bit the same size as the pellet probe, we can push the pellets through. We'll put the back cap on just to make it a thorough test. Now the first one is probably going to be undamaged, as we've not used the spring tension to locate the pellet. The next one, however, we'll be nice and careful not to damage the pellet by dropping it. And then the second one, you can then take a look at the pellets. And as you can see, both pellets have a small amount of damage on them. This side and this side of the pellet are slightly deformed, as are this side and this side of this one. Now the pellet skirt is incredibly important for accuracy. Now luckily this is fixable, so the magazine does have an adjustment for spring tension, and we'll show you how to do that very shortly. Before we get into that, however, if we take a 4.8mm drill bit, this is the same size as a pellet skirt, and then put that into the magazine. So we'll rotate the mag round, put the drill bit in there, then flip it over. If we take a look here, we can see how well the drill bit lines up with the back of the mag. Now I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that on camera or not, but you can actually feel a step as the drill bit goes through the back of the magazine. This means that the hole in the front of the mag isn't perfectly lining up with the hole in the back. We are getting a little bit of friction there. This could be damaging the pellet as it gets pushed through the magazine, so we're going to be taking care of that with just a little half round file, just taking some material out from this side to make sure that the pellet goes through nice and smoothly. The last thing we'll do is just check the rotor and remove any burrs or anything from inside the mag itself, so we'll bring you along for that. The last thing we'll do before we take the magazine apart is just check the alignment between the mag and the barrel itself. So just putting the mag on the end of the barrel, then if we take a look down it, hopefully the camera will pick that up there, but you can see the hole in the middle of the barrel is perfectly aligned with the mag. Now unfortunately there isn't really any way to adjust this. I mean, if you had a lathe you could remake the end with a different sized boss on it, but obviously that's not going to be an option for most people. The other thing you could do is adjust the chamfer in the end of the barrel to make the path into the barrel a little easier for the pellet. But our one lines up perfectly, so I'm fairly happy. With that said, we'll start work on the mag itself. The next thing we can do is take the mag apart. To do that we're going to be using a 2.5mm Allen key and just loosening this screw here. As we loosen this, there is a nut on the back, and we're just going to let that very carefully drop onto the worktop. So there it is there. We'll put that to one side, and as you do that, just make sure you keep your finger over the screw itself. With that done, we'll flip the mag over, then very carefully, whilst holding the black piece and allowing the screw to pop out, we'll push the screw out from this side. There is also an O-ring in this little well here, so just make sure that that doesn't get lost. And then the last thing we can do is flip the mag up, hold the rotor, then carefully lift this piece off, and then remove the ball bearings and the springs. So I'll just dump them out there. The last thing we can do is very carefully allow the magazine to rise up, and as it does so it will want to unspool, so just be careful as you do that. The next thing we'll do is just remove the spring itself from the housing, Before we do that though, we are just going to make a note of where the spring is currently set to. So if we take a look here, we can just see the end of the spring in this slot here. So I'm just going to make a felt tip mark where the spring is currently set to. We will be adjusting the spring tension very shortly. With that done though, we can just remove the rotor from the magazine, and then to remove the spring from this piece here, we just simply need to locate where it's hooked into, and very carefully tease the spring itself out, like so. The spring itself has this long tail on one end, and that long tail hooks into a small hole in the magazine, so hopefully you can see that there, it's just in the end. Right then, so that's the magazine all to pieces. The next thing we'll do is start working on the individual components. The first thing I'm going to be doing is just taking a small blade and going around and deburring this plastic component here. If I run my fingers over it, a couple of the edges are a little sharp, so I'm just going to be deburring that very quickly. And to deburr the rotor itself, all I'm using is a blade and a round file, just to remove any sharp edges from the magazine. So if we take a look at this corner here, not sure if the camera will pick it up, but you can see that this edge here is a little raggedy. So we're just using the blade just to nice and carefully knock the top off. We're not trying to remove tons of material doing this, we're just trying to remove the sharp edges. And we'll come through with a file, just clean the edge up. Now I will say that FX magazines have improved greatly over the last few years. On older rifles you would need to do this for pretty much all the stations in the rotor, but the newer mags are a lot better than the older ones. So I'll get all of these done off camera nice and quickly, and then I'll bring you back when we move on to the next component. And after a few minutes work, the rotor has been deburred nicely. There's no more sharp edges or anything like that. When using the file, we're not trying to remove much material, we're just trying to remove the very edge and put a small micro bevel and everything, so that the pellet doesn't get caught up on any sharp edges. And I shouldn't have to mention it, but I will anyway, when using a blade be incredibly careful. The next thing we'll do is take the rotor itself, drop that in the housing and just give it a little spin to make sure that there's no friction between the two pieces. Sometimes if there's a raised edge on this floor section in here, that can cause the rotor itself to be a little stiff in the housing, but this one seems to spin nice and freely, so we don't need to do any work in this area. The other thing I have noticed in some magazines, this spigot is a little too big and it grabs on the middle of this hole here, so that the rotor itself doesn't spin nicely in the mag. To fix that, all you would need to do is come in here with a small amount of wet or dry sandpaper, just clean that out using some like 1200 grit or something like that. But our one spins lovely and freely, so we don't need to do any work in this area. The next thing we will have to do, however, is just take care of the little edge inside the mag housing there. So we'll put our drill bit back in, rotate it round, and then check that the drill bit flows nice and freely through the magazine. And as we said earlier, there is a small amount of tension between the mag housing and the drill bit, so we're just going to be using a half round or a round file just to open that hole out just slightly. And after quite literally 2 minutes of filing, I think we've got it there. So if we put our drill bit in, put a small amount of tension between the rotor and the housing, we can move a drill bit through there, no problems whatsoever. Again, the drill bit is the skirt size of our pellets, so 4.8mm. And we can move that through without any issues whatsoever, so I think that issue's fixed. With that all said and done, that's all the work complete to the magazine itself. The last thing we need to do is reset spring tension and then rebuild the mag. To begin with, we'll take our rotor spring and our rotor, and then locate this long side of the spring and get that hooked into the side of the rotor, nice and carefully like so. The next thing we need to do is locate our original spring setting, which we marked with a felt tip pen earlier, which is this hole here. The next thing we need to do is decide what we want to happen with the return spring of the magazine. If we need to increase spring tension, we need to move the spring position round clockwise. Similarly, if we need to reduce spring tension, we can move it round counterclockwise. So we're going to be moving ours round counterclockwise, and to do that, we're we're going to be hooking this little end of the spring into one of these holes here. So we'll start off with the 12 o'clock position, get the spring hooked into place, rotate the drum round and get that hooked over the housing. Nice and simply like so. We can then check the return spring by hand. That feels a lot better than the original, but still a little stiff, so we're going to try in the 9 o'clock position. Get the spring hooked in, rotate the drum round and then recheck the mag. So that feels pretty good to me, so the last thing we can do is rebuild the magazine itself. So to begin with, we'll take our mag, flip it over and then add the O-ring and the nut to the back, nice and carefully. Put our finger over it and rotate the mag round. Next we can add the springs to these two holes here. Then the ball bearings over the top of those springs. Nice and carefully not to lose anything. Then finally we can add our lock. And the lock itself has a number of small holes. These small holes line up with the ball bearings. So we'll drop them into place. Keep everything nice and tight with our fingers. Then add our screw. Lastly, we can get that done up with a 2.5mm Allen key. Then when it's tight, we can check the lock rotates nice and freely, which our one does, and our drum still rotates nicely. With the magazine all built back up, the last thing we can do is give it a very quick bench test. So I've got a few pellets here. Just load them into the back of the mag. Get them seated into position. I'll get you a good clean look at the back of the pellets. They're fairly round, not perfect, but good enough for this little test. Put the back cover back on, then we'll use a drill bit just to push the pellets out, nice and carefully. Then if we take a look at the pellets, you can see that there's no deformation or anything like that done to the skirts. So nice, round, clean pellets. And if we compare one of those to the ones we've done earlier, you can see that these ones here that were done using the higher spring tension have a number of deformations on the skirt. Possibly a better example of that is this one here. You can see this has two distinct flats, one on either side, whereas our new one is nice and clean. The next thing we need to do is load up a full mag of pellets and then fire them through the rifle to make sure that we've not got any feed issues. Sometimes with the lower spring settings, what happens is when you get to the last few pellets in the mag, they can sometimes not feed properly and the magazine doesn't like to rotate. To fix this, all you need to do is increase spring setting again by just moving it round one clockwise. Right then, and after a lot of testing on Saturday, I am really happy with how the magazine's performed. If we take a look between the magazine groups and the single shot loaded groups, they're basically identical. If I had to be brutally honest, I would say that the single shot loaded groups are still slightly better, although it's a lot closer now. And if I'm honest, the convenience of using a magazine is really quite hard to beat. If we take a look at some of the results we was able to achieve at 25m bench rest, the results are really quite impressive. So this scorecard here was done using a magazine, and it's rivaled the ones we was able to do with a single shot loader. This particular one is a 250 14X and it was done using the mag, so I'm really happy with how the rifle's performing. We're no longer getting any major flyers when using the magazine. You still get one or two sometimes, but I'm pretty sure that's to do with the pellets rather than the mag itself. And overall I'm really quite happy. So with that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this one guys, so thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.